we could argue that the nomination is already over, that 85% of Republicans like Trump, and therefore enough of them will vote for Trump in an 8 or 9 person field that Trump will end up being nominated again.
To America, where the race to be the Republican nominee for president has been hotting up this week, with Mike Pence throwing his hat in the ring alongside Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, and a few other outsiders. It's those two men, though, really, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, who look likely to dominate the story. Two men who sound similar, have a familiar beat to their populist culture war campaign rhetoric, and who are fighting for a similar audience. There was an interesting turn of events this week when Donald Trump appeared to change gear and tell a rally that he didn't, in fact, like the term woke.
It's gone sick. And I don't like the term woke because I hear woke, woke, woke. You know, it's like just a term that used half the people can't even define it. They don't know what it is.
Sounds like a Democrat, doesn't he, all of a sudden? So what does this moment, this rejection of a populist term that Donald Trump has himself weaponised, tell us about how these two men are going to battle and how perhaps one of them may be squeezed? Well, let's speak to Julia Manchester, who is a broadcaster based in the United States of America with The Hill. Julia, hello there, good evening.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, a real pleasure. And John Leboutillier, who is a former Republican congressman, joins us as well tonight. Hello, John.
Daryl, it's great to talk to you, and it's an honor to be on with Julia, who I love watching on American TV and reading in The Hill. She's great.
Excellent. Good stuff. I like to hear it. Julia, well, we'll start with you, if that's all right, Julia. Just take us into this race, these two characters, how things are hotting up. And we'll come on to Donald Trump's woke comments in a moment. But the contrast between these two men and how this fight is beginning to unfold.
Well, look, we've been watching for a while and waiting for a while for Ron DeSantis to really hit back against Donald Trump. Ron DeSantis is the governor of Florida. And of course, Donald Trump has been in the Republican presidential primary race for quite some time now, since November. And Ron DeSantis was seen as a potential primary candidate for a long time, but he just got in about 2 weeks ago. So for the longest time, it seemed Donald Trump was really hitting Ron DeSantis, someone who used to be a very close political ally of his, over and over again in campaign messaging. And now we've started to see Ron DeSantis really hit back. And I think the dynamic between the two of them is really interesting and very important because they're almost both cut from the same cloth. They're seen as these very conservative, populist Republicans, anti-establishment. Ron DeSantis, literally, when he was running for governor, invoked Donald Trump in a number of his campaign ads. So, it's been interesting to see the two of them try to differentiate themselves from each other now that they're running against each other.
Yeah, okay. And John, that takes us to Donald Trump's comments this week. Ron DeSantis has used the word woke a lot. Well, you could, if you were to summarize him and his campaign, it would be trying to position himself as this so-called sort of anti-woke warrior. What does Donald Trump and his comments this week tell us about the way that this fight is starting to shape up?
Well, I'm going to be a little controversial and tell you that I think the fight is already over. I think the fight started 6 months ago when DeSantis got reelected hugely in Florida, and Trump had endorsed candidates around the country for Senate who lost. And what happened was Trump's numbers went down, DeSantis went up. Trump announces he's running a week later. This is still mid-November. And DeSantis in some polls was ahead of Trump. Here we are 6 months later. It's 30 to 35 points. Trump is ahead now. DeSantis has been running. He hasn't been announced until last week. He's been running, and frankly, he screwed it up. He's been a crummy candidate. He was tied or ahead 6 months ago. Yeah, Trump will do anything he has to destroy DeSantis, and he's going after him. But it's DeSantis himself who's blown his feet off with dumb stuff. The war on Walt Disney and Mickey Mouse is the stupidest thing I've ever seen, and it's not working for him. And, he's an announced candidate. We're doing this segment, DeSantis versus Trump. Look, none of the other candidates are any threat to Donald Trump at all in the primary we're talking about. None of them. He's not worried about him. He is still worried about DeSantis because we're talking about DeSantis. And so that's why Trump did a 180. and said, okay, I'll go after his strength, this woke nonsense, and destroy that. I've yet to hear one voter who voted for Donald Trump and was for Trump 6 months ago who's left Trump and gone to DeSantis. But I've seen a lot of DeSantis people, including in Florida, who've said, I'm still for Trump.
Right, right. And so, and Julia, so are we seeing Donald Trump change tact in any way or change his tone in any way to try to mop up those DeSantis voters who are coming over to him?
Look, I mean, I think Trump and DeSantis voters in many cases are sort of one and the same, especially in a state like Florida, especially in Iowa, for example, or New Hampshire. Look, Ron DeSantis in his 2018 governor's race literally modeled himself like Donald Trump. I mean, people have called him before, the two were seen as opponents or rivals. DeSantis was seen as mini Trump in many ways. So those voters are really one and the same. I think right now what you see DeSantis doing is trying to run to the right of Trump. And I think part of that is because he's trying to get that ultra conservative Republican primary base, particularly in a state like Iowa, which has a very, very strong conservative grassroots. So DeSantis has the strategy of, okay, if I win Iowa, a state that Donald Trump lost in the 2016 Republican primary, I can get enough momentum to go into New Hampshire, to go into South Carolina and the subsequent states and win the nomination. The issue with that, though, is not all Republican primary voters are like the Republican caucus goers in Iowa. There are libertarians, like there are in New Hampshire. There are some Republicans who, are for small government. And, the feud Ron DeSantis has with Disney sort of goes against that idea of a small, fiscally conservative government. So, I think Ron DeSantis is placing his chips in the camp of, okay, I'm going to get the culturally conservative grassroots. We've seen that they're really fired up, but in many ways, Donald Trump, I wouldn't say he's running to the left of DeSantis, but he's continuing to be a bit more moderate in terms of his policies.
Right. And John, you're a moderate Republican. Donald Trump is your candidate. He's the moderate wing of the party these days.
No. First of all, no, I'm not a moderate Republican. I'm a Reagan Republican.
Yes, sure.
And I've watched all this nonsense go on over the last 8 years with the Republicans, and I just laugh. I mean, they have gone from being the party of business and the party of law enforcement to being anti-FBI and anti-business. And they're all fighting against companies and the Chamber of Commerce. And in Florida, DeSantis not only went after Disney and still does, he was trying to tell the cruise ship industry during COVID, I'm not going to allow you to test for COVID for passengers getting on your ships. I mean, imagine a Republican governor telling an industry how to conduct itself. It's insane, and it's not going to work. And they're killing themselves. To watch this thing is incredible. To watch the Republicans chop each other up. A 6-week abortion ban. Now, this is what DeSantis signed 3 weeks ago. Good luck in a general election if you're the nominee running on that.
Can I just put this point to you then? So as Julia outlined there, Ron DeSantis sort of pivoted himself to the right of Donald Trump. As you outlined, John, not necessarily working. Trump's base is holding pretty strong, and you've got sort of you now have, I suppose, sort of three. I mean, to perhaps to be a bit sort of blunt about it, three prongs of the GOP, three prongs of the Republican Party, and that is Donald Trump, who is populist right, all the things that you describe, Ron DeSantis to the right of him, and then those. Republicans who are like you, Reagan types and moderates, etc., who perhaps kind of make up that third prong to the left of Trump, as it were. Do we find ourselves in a situation now where the energy is Donald Trump versus DeSantis, and that people who are more aligned with you, John, drift to Donald Trump because he is the better alternative, with DeSantis as the other option?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's too far away still. But the drifting.
Does that make sense, though, as a theory? Does that
make
sense?
As a theory, yes, it makes some sense. But there's other things. How to get at Trump is the hard thing. Now, I've watched DeSantis. He didn't really attack Trump till recently, and he's still not really hitting him. When Trump got the raid on Mar-a-Lago, the court-ordered search, DeSantis defended Trump, against it. Then when he was indicted here in Manhattan, New York, DeSantis defended Trump. Yet he's running against Trump, but he's defending Trump. And I thought to myself, this is very odd. You want to differentiate yourself from your opponent, not be the same as your opponent. And so he defends Trump, and he gets farther behind Trump. So it's a very odd situation. We could argue that the nomination is already over, that 85% of Republicans like Trump, and therefore enough of them will vote for Trump in an 8 or 9 person field that Trump will end up being nominated again. Even if 55% of the party doesn't want him for various reasons, he could still and probably will be the nominee. He's going to get indicted 2 more times anyway this year. Doesn't seem to hurt him. I guess DeSantis will defend Trump on those indictments too. It's crazy.
Okay. In terms of the sort of culture war issues around which Ron DeSantis in particular, but also Donald Trump have sort of hung their hat, I spoke to John Ronson yesterday, who is a brilliant author and journalist and podcaster. He lives in America at the moment, but he's done a lot of work on culture war issues, the origin of the culture war issues, and understanding what motivates people around them. I put this point to him about the culture wars, the role that they are playing in modern politics, and whether or not they are potent enough to sort of, to have a really heavy sway when it comes to actually putting your cross by somebody at the ballot box. Here was his point.
Ron DeSantis is making a very big run, for being like the culture war president.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's going to work because I think, in the end, most people care more about economics than about culture. Right. The culture war is basically defined as any war that doesn't involve economics. And I think economics will win the day.
You can watch the full interview with John Ronson on that and other bits and bobs on our YouTube page right now. Just search for Times Radio. Julia, is he right there?
Look, I think to an extent he is right. We'll have to see how this plays out. Look, in a primary in a state like Iowa, I think, the culture wars could play out very well. But once you go into a more general election, that's where someone like a Ron DeSantis runs into trouble. Like the congressman just said, the 6-week abortion ban in Florida that DeSantis signed into law recently, just going back to last year's midterm elections, there were a number of states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, where you saw Democrats running on this issue of abortion access, painting their Republican opponents as extreme, and Democrats won on that issue. So that's a place where I see Democrats, being more strong on the culture war issues. And then, where we've seen Republicans be successful on the culture wars, I don't think their messaging on it has been as extreme or as conservative as Ron DeSantis's messaging. For example, just down the road from me in Virginia, Governor Glenn Youngkin in 2021, I covered his race to be the governor of that state or Commonwealth. He ran very much on a lot of these culture war issues, but he did it in a tone that was not seen as ultra extreme. For example, one of Ron DeSantis's phrases of his campaign is Florida is where woke goes to die. You didn't necessarily see that same language in the Virginia governor's race. It was framed in a way that was more mainstream, could be, something that would be palatable to maybe some moderate, right-leaning Democrats, for example. So, Ron DeSantis has to, if he wants to be more palatable to a general election audience, he needs to become, make his messaging more moderate. Now, what I find interesting is that in Iowa, DeSantis likes to talk quite a bit about his abortion ban, but he hasn't really mentioned it in a state like New Hampshire, where, you have more libertarians, you have maybe a bit more, some more moderate traditional Republicans. So we'll have to see how that message evolves. But right now, I think he's struggling with, trying to streamline that message between, the all different kinds of Republicans.
Right. Really fascinating. Julia Manchester from The Hill, really nice to talk to you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
And former Republican Congressman John Leboutillier, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Daryl. Julia, nice to be on with you. It was an honor, and let's all do it again soon.